So most cases, if they end up in a lawsuit, so like a personal injury case, if it ends up in a lawsuit, or even non-personal injury cases, most cases go to something called mediation, or we also call it ADR, or alternative dispute resolution. And in a lot of courts and a lot of states, it's actually required. Like the parties aren't given the option. The judge actually makes you um, do mediation or other alternative dispute resolution before your case can go to trial. And even in those cases where it's not required, I would say it's fairly common at some point in the case for the parties to sit down and go to mediation. Mediation is generally done by, let's say, an experienced trial attorney, could be a semi-retired attorney. Occasionally I've seen retired judges do it, but typically it is an attorney who's been doing civil litigation for a number of years, oftentimes doing both plaintiffs and defense, which means representing both people who are injured as well as those who are defending, let's say the insurance companies, although it's becoming, I would say, less common for attorneys to have a long practice of doing both. Most attorneys now tend to skew much more heavily towards one or the other. But usually the mediator is someone who has been practicing for a while, has a reputation, has the type of demeanor that can help facilitate negotiations and help parties kind of bridge the gaps between their positions. And unless the parties simply cannot agree, the mediator is usually agreed upon. So names will be floated around, the lawyers may discuss it with their clients, and then they'll reach a decision on who to serve as the mediator, and then you'll reach out to the mediator's office. The mediator will give dates, and the parties will usually send in written submissions in advance of that. So the lawyers representing each side will generally prepare kind of a detailed written outline of their position, strengths and weaknesses of the case, potential factors that weigh one way or another in terms of settlement, insurance coverage issues, things like that, maybe how they think their client will do in front of a jury, things like that. They'll attach, so when we do that, we'll attach things like deposition transcripts, medical records, police reports, photographs, things like that. Things for the mediator who has no information about the case can sort of get a very condensed view of the case and then be able to kind of help the parties negotiate. But there's three very common questions that I get from my clients when we are preparing for mediation, and so I wanted to address those three common questions here in a video. So the first question is this: is it binding? Is it something, am I going to have to live with whatever the mediator says? And the short answer to that is no. Mediation differs from, let's say, arbitration. Now, arbitration can actually be a binding process, but arbitration is pretty rare. Arbitration tends to be more in property damage disputes, could be vehicle property damage, could be like homeowners policies and things like that. Arbitration typically doesn't apply in personal injury cases unless the parties both want to do it, and the arbitration process can be binding on the parties. But mediation is voluntary from start to finish. The only part that may not be voluntary is whether you have to do it. So if a court actually requires you to do mediation, you're required to actually go through the process and practice in good faith. But beyond that, who you pick as a mediator is voluntary. What your settlement position is at mediation is voluntary. The mediator can give his or her strong recommendations, but at the end of the day, each party has the sort of complete discretion whether to accept or reject a particular proposal. So there's nothing about the mediation process that is mandatory, at least in any state that I've practiced in. Number two, the other common question I get, because I tend to represent injured people, people that have never been through this before. This is not the kind of question that an insurance adjuster would have because they go through this all the time. But who will all be there, and will I have to see the other side? The simple answer is only you and the mediator. Now, it used to be, as I understand, and I think this was before I started practicing, it was common for the parties to get together in one big conference room and the mediator to kind of sit there as kind of the mediator in the midst of the conversation. I can't imagine that worked very well, and I have never been in a mediation where that's the way it went. I still see mediators, and actually I was in a mediation a couple of weeks ago where the mediator still does this, where the mediator starts out, and this was by Zoom, we weren't in person, this is strictly by Zoom, and the mediator would give some introductory remarks. And mostly it was directed, again, at my client, who's the injured party, who had never been through this before. And the mediator kind of has everyone in the same room, and the mediator is primarily speaking to my client, letting her know what this process entails, kind of setting the ground rules. But there's no back and forth going on in that. It's purely introductory remarks. And then once that is done, the mediator separates everyone, either in different rooms if you're at a physical location, or if it's by Zoom in separate rooms, or in this case, I think we just got off Zoom and then we just did everything by phone after that. You will not be on the same call. You will not be in a Zoom session. You will not be in the same room as the other side, the insurance company, their lawyers, the person that caused the crash, anything like that. In any kind of mediation I've been part of, you are totally separate. You're speaking with just the mediator, and you don't have to worry about running in to someone else that you wouldn't be comfortable with. So that's kind of the answer to two. No, you won't be in the same room sort of negotiating with the other side. And number three, the other question I get a lot is who pays for it? Generally speaking, the mediation expense, so the mediators don't work for free. They charge, and they charge handsomely, I would say, for their time. And as a general rule, unless the parties agree otherwise, the mediation expenses are split equally between the parties. So if I go into a mediation and it's me and my client against another driver and their insurance company, typically that expense is split two ways. I get a bill for half, the insurance company and their lawyer get a bill for half, and we each pay our half of the mediator. And then that in turn is typically deducted from the settlement as a case expense. And I'll have another video on how case expenses work. But as a general rule, the mediation expenses are split evenly between the parties. When I was a younger lawyer, I would say it was more common for deals kind of towards the finish line to get to finish by the insurance company agreeing to pay the entire cost of the mediation. It still happens, but I would say it doesn't happen as often, and the reason being is for certain insurance companies it can be easier to allocate money towards case expenses such as mediation rather than payment on a claim. And so that sometimes is a way to get around that. But you're really only talking about, let's say $1,000 or $1,500 of value, depending on how much the mediator charges. So as a general rule, mediation expenses are going to be divided equally between the parties. If you have an attorney, your attorney is going to pay that expense and then pass that bill on to you later on, depending on what your fee agreement is. So that's kind of the three common questions I get when it comes to mediation. If there are other questions that people have, feel free to leave a comment. But if you're looking for an attorney, or if you're one of my clients, don't leave a comment. Just go to the link tree in the description below and send me an email message so we can speak confidentially. So anyway, hope that was helpful. Appreciate everyone watching my channel, and until next time, have a good one.